experience, and I've put a lot of effort into this, and I think it kind of is also like I enjoyed the pain of this type of stuff, so maybe that's part of it. I've been preparing this over the last 2 days and thinking what's useful, and like looked at what tools we wrote, and I open sourced a few, which I come to. Still, I think like if you think something is not, if you have more questions on certain things, please like keep them in mind, and then we can talk after about it in a Q&A session. Because I wasn't sure on how deep I dig in everything. KeepSafe, some of you might know, most of you probably know. It's a personal privacy app to store your important things in digital life at a safe place that you can lock away. So we compare it to a drawer in your desk where you put your important documents that shouldn't not there around. So we already mentioned a little, we're 35 million users across iPhone and Android. And we built over the last year and a half, we built a backend service for all that stuff, so now there's also a backend. So suddenly like language is not only apps, it's also like backend. And so we've been internationalized fairly early. So like when we incorporated KeepSafe as a company, KeepSafe was translated into 7 languages already. We're like 12 or 13 languages now. And over time we learned on how to get better and what are the problems with this entire internationalization thing. With the main problem on internationalizing is you don't really know the problems because you don't understand a single word of all the other languages in your app, right? So you look at a Chinese app and you're like, looks right, right? Chinese. And some of them are technical things, and a lot of it is like also like more. So, as I said, this should give an overview on like what we did and learned, and hopefully we can take this from there. So the question is like, why bother at the first place? So we have 30% of our users in the US, and maybe a little more English-speaking with UK and other English-speaking countries. But that still is the majority of our users is rest of the world, right? And to give you an idea on what internationalization looks like when it actually works, I took a screenshot of our Google Play console, and there's 2 graphs, right? There's like the purple one and the orange one. The purple one is Arabic and the orange one is Turkish, right? And so you can see pretty clearly when you introduced Arabic as a language in the app and in the store, and even more clear when we introduce Turkish as a language in the store and in the app. Right? And so this is a pattern that we can see across a bunch of different languages, and it looks sometimes different, like depending on how many people speak English in that given country, or like I don't know how you say language area, or not. So like for Turkish, obviously they didn't find our app in English, but now Turkey is a top 10 country for us. Right? So when we started out with this, and better said, like when we were in a little, because we were already in 7 languages, when we incorporated, it was like a very clunky process and was probably very bad. We had a few goals. So one is like we wanted to make KeepSafe feel to the user like it's a local app. Right, so if I'm a German user, I want to feel like, oh, this could be like some guy sitting in Berlin and working on it. And we wanted to have that basically for every language that we support. And that goes beyond just like when you open the app to look at the app. That also goes for like when you interact with the company, right? So if I'm like a German user, which I am, and I write to KeepSafe, and my app is in German and everything is in German, I'll write German, right? And I expect an answer in German, right? So that's one thing. We wanted to make it feel like native for every user. What was very important for us, we wanted to be able to change content at the same pace and ease as if there was no translation. So if everything would be English, you just like would go and like change something, and it would be changed, and you don't have to worry about it. So that was like the other goal that we wanted to achieve. And of course, because we're software people, we don't want to do manual work, right? So, which kind of goes hand in hand is like you want to change as if there's no other language. that basically all the translations and all the internationalization is basically abstracted away from the people who work on it on a day-to-day basis. And then one of the things that that we always wanted, and seemed a lot harder, is have a consistent voice, right? So KeepSafe in English is serious but not too formal, right? And in German it's slightly more formal than in English because the language is like that. So in German there's a formal word of you, which is not in English, and we decided to use that, whereas in English it's just like you. And then there's also terms that are used throughout the app, where it's kind of like we want to keep that consistent, so that the app says something here and it says something different here, but it means the same. So when you think about all those things, it's like no problem. That was easy. That was a slide I had in my last presentation. It still works pretty well. And there's a bunch of services out there, and like Android and iPhone have string files. You can just upload them, and then you just get translated things back, and cool, I'm done, and I don't have to worry about anything else. And that's what we did in the beginning, besides that the services where you could do that were not that great. So we started out with a tool called Gengo or MyGengo, and they had something where you could just upload files, and then there's a bunch of people who translate this, and then you download it again. Turns out we started writing scripts already back then to import stuff. Now Google has some support of like translate your app with Google, and it seems to work better. But so it seems very easy when you start, until you get to the points when you run into all those little problems, which then basically over time just becomes pain. And started out with the services we used, like the interfaces were not good, so we started like, okay, now we need scripts to upload this stuff more efficient. So now I have like four main areas where we spend a lot of time in, and I'm giving an overview on how we work on that, and then you guys can we can talk later about like if you have more specific questions on those things. So one is like simple stuff, which is your app, right, or your product itself, right? So things that seem obvious when I tell it to you, but that are not that obvious when you actually work on it, or like you might forget it, is like in your app there's right to left design, right? So like all Arabic speaking countries are right to left. So like we were translating things into Arabic, but we never thought about like actually making the layouts also like go right to left, that when it's Arabic that it actually looks right, right? It's like all our Arabic was kind of like, the app looked like normal, and then some of the text fields, the text was right to left, so it was kind of like a little off, and we're like, oh, well. And even taking this screenshot, you can see a little further like down, there's like a status bar, you probably can't see in the back. There's like usually 1 crown, now there's 2 crowns, so like there's a bug that we didn't find. I found another 1 or 2 bugs in our right to left layouts while taking those screenshots. I'm like, oh, it's good that I'm doing it. Then there's like not that obvious things like in English and in most of the languages there is a singular and plural. But there is languages where there is like a dual, right? So they have different endings of words depending on how many, right? So one, let's say chair in English is like 1 chair in another language. But then 2 chairs is not chairs, it's like something else, and then 3 chairs, and then it's again chairs. So there's this concept of like dual and plural. Then suddenly other languages have way longer words. So you're like, oh yeah, we just use this word. Let's just use cancel or whatever. And then suddenly you open your Spanish translations, and there's a word that's like that long. And you're like, that doesn't really fit in my button as I would like it to be. And different platforms have different support for those things. So on iPhone, I remember it would shrink the font size automatically to make it fit in, or you could like strip it off. On Android, you can strip it off, but there's nothing that shrinks your font size when it doesn't fit in your layout. So we started writing like our own little text view that would basically measure after drawing how big the button is and how long the text is, and it would like shrink it a little down until a minimum font size, and then after the minimum font size it will start chopping off the end of the word. And things like very simple things, like when you have strings with formatting where you have like 2 placeholders. So one of our main examples is like the gallery is like there's at the top there's like 1 of 5 photos or like 2 of 5 photos, right? There's no guarantee that in another language it's like 2 of 5, right? It could be like 5 of 2, and then in the language of it's translated. And your translators, if you don't know this because you cannot validate this really because you have no idea when you look at it if it's right or wrong, they will just say like, oh yeah, they just changed the order, but if you don't accommodate that in your code, then basically you will still fill your first number into the first spot and your second number in the second spot. So that's kind of like the simple stuff in the app. If you get those right, then you're already like pretty far down without actually too much work. It's just more like knowing about those things. Then what turned out over time as a big problem is actually consistency of voice, right? So all the existing translation services that are out there, where you just upload your files and then you wait until it's translated, and they all advertise with like really quick turnaround. Within an hour you have your translations done, and it's like, yeah, awesome, an hour. The problem turns out to be that every time you upload something and it just takes an hour, it's another person translating your stuff, right? So we have like hundreds of strings in our apps, and every time another person came in to translate a new string or change an existing one, they would have no idea about like what is actually the sound, the voice of the app, what is the terminology, how are the other ones. So we'd basically end up with this thing that is kind of like not really written by a human. And again, you have no idea because you look at it and you don't know, right? So like we would look at a German translation like, sounds wrong, or like you go through and like, well, why is it called this here and this here? It's like, yeah, that's because like it's a different person translating it, right? And then the same goes for the tone you wanna emphasize in your product, like how you wanna communicate with the people. It's like more casual, is it very formal, and like people who translate it don't know basically, right? So what did we do to get better at this, right? So one of the big things is you start having your own translators. Basically actual people that you can talk to, and not an API. It's a very foreign concept for a lot of people by now, but that is existent. And so we're like looking around, okay, so now we want to have real translators so that our Korean version is basically always translated by the same Korean person, right? And ideally that person can download KeepSafe on their phone and actually knows what it's doing. And but then you end up in this spot like, okay, now there's 2 things, because so far I had like one service that I uploaded everything and that translated everything, but now I have translators, but how do they now translate, right? So suddenly now you need a tool where you can upload things like that. Luckily there's a few in the market by now. We use a tool called Web Translated. There's other ones as well. We are really happy with those. It's more or less a single guy sitting in Paris with an intern, and I think he did internationalization for Last.fm, and he wrote that tool, and he charges a little bit of money. But he's very flexible, like when we need something like, hey, this is not working, and so that is the tool we use. It comes with a command line support, which is very handy. So like now when we change strings or add strings in English, we just go in the command line and say like VTI for web translated, and then basically just say like push language English, and then it pushes the English language. And then it can say status, and then I see which of my strings are translated and verified. And when everything is translated, I just say pull, and then it downloads all the translated content into the right place, and I can just like build it and it's done. So I don't have to touch it at all. The interesting part now is kind of like, how do you find those translators that translate all your stuff, right? So our thing that we have done the most is basically asking other people who they're using, because for us at the moment it's a trust thing, right? So I asked the guy who like built Web Translated, like, hey, do you know some good people for this and this and this language, right? And then like, oh yeah, here's some people. And the good thing with translators is they all have very detailed profiles about companies that they're working for, software that they translated, And so you can get a pretty good feel of like what did this person do and not. And if you combine that with a recommendation of someone you trust, that works pretty well for us. We are still at the point where we have one translator per language, so we have no one who is proofreading the other person. And so that is not ideal, but it's for us at the moment good enough. Another problem is kind of like suddenly you have a bunch of people working for you, so like we have like 12 people working for us on an hourly basis. And so now they're all small business or individual contractors, so they're like, oh, can I send you an invoice? Or like, can you do PayPal? I'm like, no, I don't want to do any of this, right? So what we ended up doing, there's a platform called Odesk, and it's basically a freelance work marketplace. And so people can basically sign up and say like, I'm a translator, and you can hire them through Odesk. And the beauty of that is that they basically submit their hours or work to Odesk, and then Odesk writes you one bill at the end of the month and just goes off the credit card, right? And they get paid by Odesk. So all the hassle of like, how do I pay them, and what paperwork do we need because they're sitting all over the place, is all abstracted away by Odesk. It costs 10% more, so Odesk charges 10% on top of what every person charges you. And we are happy to pay those fees for the translation stuff because it just makes our life so much easier, right? Because otherwise, I would get every month, I would get like 12 invoices about very low amounts into an email inbox, and then we had to deal with it and pay people in different ways and whatever. So this works very well for us. It's like it abstracts away all the people complexity of like how you pay people, while still having individual people that you can actually talk to and you can explain how this works and how this should feel and how this should sound and everything. And Web Translated is a tool that makes it actually very easy on the implementation side. And so we use basically that tool, Web Translated, for any project we have that needs to be translated. So I think it's like 6, 7 projects or something like that in there. And I'll get to them in a second. And the translators, they have like one portal where they can log in, and everything they have to do is like in there, so they don't have to deal with anything else. And when something changes, they get an email, and so that works pretty well. So the next thing, as soon as you have your stuff translated, people expect that you're actually speaking their language. Right? As I said, like our German users, they write to us in German. Our Japanese users write to us in Japanese. Or Turkish users write in Turkish, and you get it so on. Right? So this is a screenshot I took from our customer support website. It's hard to read in back, but basically it's like, so the first user is Arabic, the second one is English, the third is I think French, and then there's like a Turkish one, and then there's something, and then there's a Japanese one, and so you get the point. So people write a bunch of tickets in a bunch of languages. We get around 1,500 of those tickets a day. So there's a lot of like emails or tickets in languages that we don't speak natively. So what are the things that you really want to get going to actually starting to deal with that? And I think you can do it. You can choose what you want to do first or second. I'm just telling you what we do and how we started doing this. So we have customer support people who speak most of the languages that we support. So we have a customer support team of like 6, 7 people now. They're all remote people. Most of them, again, are hired through Odesk. There's one person who manages all of them. Her name is Nicoletta. She's fantastic. She speaks 5 languages, and then the languages where there's more workload, we hire a person that is basically part-time working on those. So like, we have a part-time Korean person, we have someone who speaks Japanese, and so forth. So we have like 6, 7 people who cover most of the languages that we support as an app, and who are able to basically interact with our users. The part that you really want to make sure is like when you pick a customer support tool to do all this, pick one that actually supports multi-language, which is surprisingly, and it's a schema, it's something you will realize throughout everything you do is like there's a bunch of cool tools out there that make everything very easy, like from newsletter tools to like drip campaign email tools to customer support tools. But as soon as you need multi-language, 99% of them fail, right? Because they're all written by people who live around here, and they're just like, oh, well, just English is fine, right? And so we use a tool called Zendesk. They're the biggest in that space. They support multi-language. It's not as good as I think it could be. That's why we wrote a bunch of tooling. But at least it covers all the basics, right? So you can say like, okay, new tickets that come in this language go to this person, and so forth. So then, with the amount of tickets we have, and I think it's generally speaking a good idea also for low amounts of tickets, there's something called macros. So like when someone has a problem, like writes an I forgot my PIN, that you can just basically have a predefined answer for that problem that you apply to this. So then even languages where your people are not as good as, like so Nicoletta, our customer support person, she speaks 5 languages, but some of them she's better than in others, right? And by having those predefined answers and having those being translated by professional translators, it always sounds correct. So like, you know, like you can have people being able to read what it means without being perfectly capable of writing perfect replies in that language, but you have those replies written in English once, and then you translate them with professional translators into like something that works. Right? So then there might be, depending on your volume or like how you approach it, maybe you don't have international like people who speak a bunch of languages. There will be tickets in languages that you don't speak, right? And so for the first 2 years of KeepSafe, the solution of that was copy Mark and copy the content of the ticket, open google.translate.com and paste it in there, read what it actually means, then write a reply or use one of those predefined macros and then send it away. So now the next time this ticket comes back in because the user replied to this, you have a stream of a conversation in a language you don't speak. So you basically just do the same thing again. Right? So you copy and paste it again, so you know what was the actual conversation, then you copy and paste your own answer to figure out what you actually said, and then you start replying again. Right? So what we did is we wrote a Chrome browser plugin, which basically does all this auto translation stuff for you in line. So the screenshot you see on the right is basically it's a Japanese ticket, and you see below there's a blue box, and that blue box is basically it's reading the content from the ticket, it's posting it against Google Translations API, and translates it and renders it right back into where the original ticket is. You can basically just see what it is, and you can apply one of your internationalized macros. That works really well. Google Translation API is like dirt cheap. And so that has been a huge help for us. This is one of the things I've been open sourcing today. I'll get to that later. The other thing is to reduce all that support amount, you want to provide a help center where people can just like look at the stuff themselves and like find FAQs and stuff. So now you also need to translate that. Right? Surprisingly, there's nothing really out there that works really well. So we use Zendesk's Help Center, which is their self-service portion of their product, which supports multi-language, and you can open it and you can say like my language is like Spanish, and you see everything in Spanish if there's Spanish content. But somehow on a product level, the interface of how translators and how you get that international content in there is basically useless. So we started writing our own CMS system that is file-based, that allows you to export, like to write this content and then basically get it translated in our normal translation workflow and then basically upload it into the Help Center. So that's how we do customer support. There's a small things that I get to which apply for other things as well. In the next part of this, we got to the point of like, yeah, we would like to send emails to our users. And so you think like sending emails is pretty straightforward. You use one of those email services like SendGrid or Mandrill, and then you can just call an API and you send an email. But now all our users speak different languages. So then you look around and it's like, okay, how can I actually make my emails international with the same standards of like, I just want to write it once in English and I don't want to worry about it, and if I change it, it should be updated. Surprisingly, this seems incredibly hard. I haven't found anything out there that did this really well for us. Some of the requirements we had for this is like, I want to write it once, and then I want to basically create it in all languages. So I can just basically, copy and paste the email content to our server, and then when I say send a welcome email, the server just picks the welcome email in the right language and sends it out to the user, depending on the language. All those email services, so like email clients, you always want to send an HTML and a text version, right? So okay, I want to write it once, and I want to have HTML, and I want to have text, right? Then the next big thing for email, and that applies for like the Help Center content as well, and for some of you in-app stuff, but way less, is formatting, right? So if you look at this email, for example, it's a header image, it says congratulations, it's like, oh, welcome to your free premium trial email. And then there's some formatting, like there's a list items and stuff. And so we want to have that formatting be consistent across all languages. So when I emphasize a link in bold or another word in bold, then it should also be bold in the translated language, right? And then obviously right to left always comes back. So what we ended up doing is basically we wrote an email parser tool. And so how this works, and it works actually relatively well. Like it's at the point where there's like no technical problems. Like now I'm like dealing with people problems, but this is like my next slide. And so what we did is we thought about how can we like maintain what gives us consistent formatting across different languages, gives us text and HTML, and we came up with Markup or Markdown, right? So what we do now is we write all our emails in Markdown, and I'll just misuse the Android string file format, XML format that Android comes along, because our translation tool already works with it. So what we do, what you can see here is basically, you can see here on the left, you can see, well, this is one email, right? So like at the top there's a subject, and then there's different placeholders that get rendered into an HTML template, and the content of those placeholders is Markdown, right? So you see here, special offer is like a header 3, so it's like, it looks like blue on the other side, and you see like at the top there's like sender name, and then you see like 3 months free trial, so there's like double star 3 months free trial, like it's just Markdown formatting. And what happens is when we upload this content to our translation tool, that our translators basically only see those text blocks. And the only thing they have to do is basically maintain the Markdown syntax that you have in your original email, right? So if there's 3 hashtags to make a header 3, they just have to type 3 hashtags and then whatever they translate in English, and it will maintain formatting. And then the process is again the same. We'll download those translations, and then we have an email parser that basically renders text emails and HTML emails for all languages all at once. Right? And so suddenly you end up with this like folder. It's all files. So each email is like the email name .subject, which is the subject, and email name .html and .text, which is like the content. And then for each language we have a folder that matches that locale, and then server side, if you want to send an email, a German email, that is like a welcome email, you just go into like the DE folder and pick the welcome email .html and .text and .subject. There's some templating placeholders in there so you can fill in names, but it's all pretty straightforward. We open source that as well. Works pretty well for us. The next problem, and that's kind of like the thing that is like has been like hunting me until last week, is how do you validate that the stuff your translators do and that you get back is actually correct? Right. So the problem we ran into is we are sending out access codes right? And like whenever you create a new account, you get an access code that you have to enter, and then you validate your account. And so Markdown, that's how I discovered it. It's like Markdown, you write a link in Markdown with square brackets, the link name, and then you know it's normal brackets without a space for the link, and then it renders your link, right? And then if you put if you put something in front of it, you can change the style differently. So like in this example, you see there's an upgrade now button in blue, right? And that is the English version. And then the Korean, now what is this? Portuguese on the right doesn't have that button because the translator ended up putting a space in between the brackets, and suddenly it's not a valid Markdown link anymore. Right? And because of that, it all breaks. And so then we run into this problem, okay, things are broken on a formatting level because of people, and the reason for that is like translators are people, right? So they could just write down stuff and like, yeah, you see a line break in the translation tool because it's like a too long of a line, so it breaks in the layout, but it doesn't show a new line. So, but they still enter a new line because then it looks the same in the translation tool. And so you run into like those type of things, which fucks up your formatting. The other thing is like the translators, because they are totally out of context, they don't know what they're translating. For them, it's just like this row of text where there's like an English version, you just write your version, right? And you don't know if it's an email, if it's in the app, or if it's a customer support request. And if it's in the app, you don't know where it's in the app. You don't see what the texts around it are. And so you end up with like weird quality issues. And one of the things that really did it for us when we realized we have a problem is we showed users who use KeepSafe for a while a pop-up that says like, you know, your trial has been expired. It's time to upgrade. Right? And this is like it's pretty straightforward and kind of like casual in English. Like, you know, like it says like, you know, like you've been using KeepSafe for this long, your trial is over, it's time to upgrade, and then you can upgrade or you can downgrade. Suddenly we shipped that, and suddenly Japanese and Korean users were complaining a lot. And then you look at the translation, it's like, well, there is a translation. And then you start like, okay, why are they complaining so much that they feel we have taken their content hostage? It's like what they use. Right? You guys take my content hostage. I only get it back when I pay. Like, we're like, no, you can always say downgrade, right? But what happens is when you speak to a Japanese person, they read it because the translator didn't have any context. It's like, yeah, the way you say it, it sounds like hostage, right? It's like, you just have not been polite enough here, or you would never put that phrase like this together in this context or stuff, right? So that's like formatting context. And so what we started developing is basically the approach of like automated testing from software for all our translation content. So what we did for this specific problem in Android, and what we're going to do more and more, is basically in our automated tests, we take screenshots of different screens, and we take those screenshots in all languages, and I have a naming convention that basically just defines them. That's screenshots that I want to show to my translators. And then I have a script that pulls out all those screenshots and puts them in a Dropbox folder in the right locales that I share with my translators. So they can basically, after they're done and I can say, can you please validate it, they can just go in there and click through all the screens by just tapping down and look at the screens and see if it actually makes sense, right? And as soon as I did that, like 4 out of my translators are like, oh, well, yeah, you would never say that like this in this context. Like, well, glad we do this, right? And the other thing is like, which this screenshot is of, is formatting validation, right? So now we wrote tools to make sure when you write in Markdown that the same Markdown structure that is in the English version is also available in the translated version. So in this example, you see the blue button, upgrade now, in English, and it doesn't exist in Portuguese. And like below, it's still hard from the back, but you can see the slides later, like they're available, right? You'll see basically that there's a header line in English that doesn't exist in the translated version. And And what we're doing with this in the beginning, we just, so we run it like as unit tests, so all our translated content is checked into GitHub, which is really convenient, generally speaking. But now we have like those content validation scripts running as automated tests, so whenever you check in content, it basically runs through all that stuff and tells you if this is right or wrong. Right? Other things we check for is links, like broken links or missing images. Right? Just in emails, like if you like misspell or mistype a URL, or you forget like a G on JPEG, it will not show. So we take every link that is in there, we make sure we get an HTTP 200. And so that has been working really well to see the problems in formatting and stuff like that. The problem that we run into is that the process from the person translating it and marking the stuff as translated and then going through all of it, and then you get back to it a day later and you download it, and then you run all your validation scripts over it, and like, hey, there's an error, and then you send the errors back, and then they do some other work because they're freelancers, and then by the time they get it to fix it, you lose like basically 2, 3, 4 days for one cycle. So what we now started doing is, for our translation tool that we use, has webhooks. So whenever a translator marks a segment, which is just a very small piece of text, as verified, so like it goes from translated to proofread and then from proofread to verified. So as soon as it goes to verified, we run the validations we want to run against it on every project, and if that fails, we set it right away, we send it back to proofread in the tool, and we send them an email formatting diff or whatever is wrong, and with a direct deep link to that particular string, so they can just click on it and fix it. So that's what we've been working on making sure all the stuff that gets translated and so forth is actually is correct, and without us knowing everything, we're having to look at everything. As mentioned, I looked through what we all wrote for this, and I open sourced a bunch of it today. It's all in pretty decent shape. It's not perfect, right? But it does the job for us, and it should be free for everyone to use. So just going through this really quick. We use Zendesk Help Center. We wrote a file-based CMS for it, so basically every category is a folder and every article is a file. You just write Markdown in there, and it basically does all the formatting for you. And same with translation, so you can maintain that across. It downloads content, uploads content, and so forth. We open sourced our Google Chrome plugin for inline translations. So if you use Zendesk for your customer support and you get tickets in languages you don't use or you don't speak, it does it automatically for you inline. You just specify the languages you speak yourself, and then it will translate every other one. We open sourced our email rendering tool that basically takes your Markdown files and HTML templates and renders emails in HTML and text out of it, which has been good for us. We wrote a general purpose content validator, which has a few things. It has a Markdown validator, it has an HTML validator, and some other things that we run all our translated content against to make sure it's actually the same. And it's getting better at actually giving out error messages that are meaningful to non-technical people, right? Which is the biggest challenge. And then we open sourced our little application that is basically a real-time content validator for our tool called Web Translated, which is based on our general content validator. So it basically just does it on the fly. Learnings we took from that. In the beginning, it sounded all very easy. All those services that are out there seem really compelling. But we realized that most of the stuff out there is actually not optimized for multi-language, and there's a variety of problems you run into. And it's just continuous effort to make it good and to not block your entire organization while dealing with this. What we also learned is if you get it right, it's just straight out awesome. Right? It's there's nothing cooler than just being able to do all your stuff in English as you do today, and 12 languages will just happen without you worrying about it in the back across your entire company, from content in your apps, emails, customer support, all those things just basically work in multi-language out of the get-go. So yeah, that's the gist of it. So,